Africa, historically, sub-Saharan Africa, has been fundamental to the global prosperity of the advanced countries. Okay? And Africa had a role to play. It has a role as a raw material producer. We will not allow sub-Saharan Africa to escape that. Okay, we do everything to keep sub-Saharan Africa where it is, also impoverished. It's absolutely vital for the prosperity of everyone else. So let's get clear about that. Okay, and this means all the economic structures, all the global institutions, and the economics we teach everyone is all designed to keep Africa exactly where it is. And whether it is Europe or US or now China, it's always the same. We need Africa to be impoverished because we need those raw materials and we need them dirt cheap. If Africa does do something different, I assure you living standards of all those in Europe and North America and Asia is going to fall. Okay? And that is a big price to pay. I assure you that the West is not going to allow that without a big fight. Okay? So the job of many Western academics is to convince Africans they have to keep doing what they're doing. Okay? And to show them it's your fault that you're poor. It's not our fault. It's your fault that you're poor. We know the basic forces that have caused this underdevelopment. We know it's colonization. I will not discuss that very much because my colleague speaker is going to go into some aspects of this. No country ever develops without manufacturing. Okay, producing raw materials will not take you anywhere. Producing basic agricultural goods will not take you anywhere. And let's have a look at how much manufacturing activity takes place in sub-Saharan Africa. We can look over the last 15 odd years, 15, 20 years. And we see manufacturing has actually declined. We will never, as Western economists, as Western policymakers, we cannot afford to allow Africa to industrialize and start producing manufactures. Okay, so we will do everything to stop that. And you can see now with the weakness in the global economy, it's the emerging markets, that's the red line.
We need to understand the real reason why USAID is in Africa.
Africa, historically, sub-Saharan Africa has been fundamental to the global prosperity of the advanced countries. Okay? And Africa had a role to play. It has a role as a raw material producer. We will not allow sub-Saharan Africa to escape that. Okay, we do everything to keep sub-Saharan Africa where it is, also impoverished. It's absolutely vital for the prosperity of everyone else. So let's get clear about that. Okay, and this means all the economic structures, all the global institutions, and the economics we teach everyone is all designed to keep Africa exactly where it is. And whether it is Europe or US or now China, it's always the same. We need Africa to be impoverished because we need those raw materials and we need them dirt cheap. If Africa does do something different, I assure you living standards of all those in Europe and North America and Asia is going to fall. Okay? And that is a big price to pay. I assure you that the West is not going to allow that without a big fight. Okay, so the job of many Western academics is to convince Africans they have to keep doing what they're doing. Okay, and to show them it's your fault that you're poor. It's not our fault. It's your fault that you're poor. We know the basic forces that have caused this underdevelopment. We know it's colonization. I will not discuss that very much because my colleague speaker is going to go into some aspects of this. No country ever develops without manufacturing. Okay, producing raw materials will not take you anywhere. Producing basic agricultural goods will not take you anywhere. And let's have a look at how much manufacturing activity takes place in sub-Saharan Africa. We can look over the last 15 odd years, 15, 20 years. And we see manufacturing has actually declined. We will never, as Western economists, as Western policymakers, we cannot afford to allow Africa to industrialize and start producing manufactures. Okay, so we will do everything to stop that. And you can see now with the weakness in the global economy, it's the emerging markets, that's the red line, it's those countries that are suffering the most, the emerging markets producing raw materials. They're suffering the most. And here it translates into their currencies being butchered. Okay? The currencies are collapsing of these countries, and many of them are sub-Saharan African countries. Some of them are Latin American countries, okay, who also rode that same wave. They thought that raw material production was going to save them. But now they're facing terrible problems. And I'm sorry to say, it's just going to get worse in the next 2 years. It's not going to get any better. Relative to the rest of the world, sub-Saharan Africa is going to suffer. Again, why? Because it's condemned to this raw material production. This is basically why. How is it condemned to that? Well, the first and most important is the economic structures. After colonization ended, we needed new structures to keep these countries where they were. Okay? And the first of those is aid. Okay? We give them aid. Aid for what? Actually, we give them aid to keep repressive regimes in power. That's all. Okay? We're not giving them aid for much more except a little bit of infrastructure to make sure those raw materials get to the ports and are gotten out of the ground. But for the most part, we give repressive regimes money and power and guns to keep that system going. This is what it's fundamentally about. All the hypocrisy about transparency and democracy and bullshit like that, it's all bullshit. You know? And at least the Chinese don't enter into that bullshit. They say, we don't care about the whole political environment, we just give the money. Okay? And it's for raw material extraction, period. Okay? Number two, and this was a very important one, still is debt. I was telling some of my students today, was it today or yesterday, about Confessions of an Economic Hitman. You remember this? Have any of you heard of this one? Confessions of an Economic Hitman. It's a book written by John Perkins, who used to work for a very nebulous, opaque bank. No one had ever heard of this bank, but it was formed in the 1950s by the IMF, the CIA, and the American State Department. And it had only one job: to lend money to developing countries that were raw material producers in order to indebt them. Once you are in my debt, I control you. Okay? And this bank had 4,000 employees. But no one ever heard of this bank, you see. But it would go to country after country offering loans. And if the president did not accept the loan, they were killed. And he gives 2 examples of presidents who were killed when they did not accept the loan. You see, the lending is also very important to trap the country. It's very important. It's part of that process. I teach in Suriname. And Suriname in recent times had a huge foreign exchange reserve. So big they didn't need to borrow money. And then one of my students who was very high up in government, he said, you know, the IMF is trying to convince us to borrow money from foreigners. Why? I thought, duh, you know, sorry about this, but, you know, this is the game. And in the end, Suriname did borrow this money because the IMF said, if foreigners lend to you, then everyone will think Suriname is such a strong economy that foreigners are interested in lending to you. You understand? Before Lula came to power, you know, the previous president in Brazil, Cardoso, his predecessor, took a gigantic international loan. No necessity for taking the loan. Why? Because once I catch you with the debt strings, I hold you forever. You are my prisoner. Okay, so debt has been this huge spider's web which has trapped sub-Saharan Africa and keeps them held there. Aid, debt. We have a third structure which is again not known by many people, but it's something that was put in place and continues to this very day, with no one discussing it. No one says anything about it. It is monopoly buying structures. This is for all raw materials and basic agricultural goods produced by developing countries. There are only 4 or 5 Western multinationals that buy all those goods. And they collude between them. So if you take any major product, these Western multinationals, they collude between them. Even if we go down to banana production, we had a PhD done here at the ISS, and the person showed that the 4 or 5 major multinationals, they collude, and in order to make sure their control is total, what they do is they force all the producers to produce the same uniform banana. You know, the crap you buy in the West and has no taste at all. You go to any developing country, you know how a banana tastes, don't you? There's so many of them, lots of varieties, but we only market 1 or 2 types, so we have control, you see. If you don't produce at the price I want you to produce, I go to the next country. You see, we get control. So these buyers, they impose that control, and they keep pushing the prices down and down and down. Okay, this is the game. No one says anything about it. There are no commissions of inquiry to say, this is illegal what you're doing. The WTO has nothing to say about this. But sorry to say, you know, if banana prices rose 10 times, especially for people like me who love bananas, okay, I'd protest. I like my living standards. Okay, it's the same with all the other raw materials, you see. We're all benefiting, we're complicit. We're actually complicit in this because we will protest and shout out if the situation ever changed. Okay, now we come to those international institutions. And I must tell you this from the outset, don't think of them as wicked. IMF, World Bank, WTO. We always think evil creatures, horrible. It's not. It's just economics. It's economic warfare. The rich declare war on the poor. It happens everywhere. It happens in a country. The rich control the government. Of course they do. You really believe you have democracy? Come on. You know, I mean, grow up. This is not about people living in democratic systems. What we have is the rich control. The rich set up these institutions explicitly to control the poor countries. And they don't give them much room for maneuver. Which incidentally, when the IMF starts talking of poverty alleviation, you should also understand that there's another game there also starting to play, which I'm going to come back to later. But what do these institutions do? What does the IMF do? What is structural adjustment about? It's about making sure countries keep producing what we want them to produce. We make sure they have recurrent balance of payments problems. You notice these countries never get out of balance of payments problems. You notice that? Whereas countries that never took IMF support are always out of balance of payments problems. But the countries that are continuously getting advice and support by the IMF, they're always in balance of payments problems. Why? because that's the way we keep our stranglehold on them. And that's what we have done. We have done, the IMF and the World Bank. And they've also done something very, very important. And that is they have destroyed the self-sufficiency of these countries. Colonization started it. Okay? One of the most important things is we destroy food self-sufficiency. Okay? And the World Bank continued it. They forced most countries to eliminate all food subsidies and food support. Okay? Because once you don't produce your own food, I increase my control over it. How do we know this? Well, very funny thing happened some years ago. Not so funny, actually. It involved starvation of a large number of people in Malawi. Okay? Many of you could remember this because it was really tragic. But the Malawian finance minister, who was under terrible threat at the time, suddenly broke ranks and he said, well, you know why we had this famine? Because one of the conditions of the loan given by the World Bank was we destroyed all our grain surplus stocks. Why? Because remember, we want you dependent. 1970s, the US Senate, the US Congress said, we will not allow Latin America to produce their own food. We will start a strategy involving the IMF and the World Bank to destroy food self-sufficiency of Latin America. Then they will indeed be our true backyard. And that's exactly what they've done. Look at all the Latin American countries. Look at them. They used to be food self-sufficient, but they're no longer food self-sufficient. Now here comes the kicker. This is the beautiful part of it. I congratulate them. You know I admire them because they do it so well. Okay? I know it sounds really perverse. But we have now in the WTO something called the Agreement on Agriculture. Okay? You know what that Agreement on Agriculture states? It says, if you don't have any subsidies, you're not allowed to put these subsidies on food. But if you have subsidies and income support for food production, you can keep them. Who has all the subsidies and income support? US, Europe. The largest budgets in the world for supporting their farmers are Europe and US. But the World Bank and IMF have destroyed all those subsidies. You see, all those subsidies have been destroyed. And now we're telling these countries, you don't have subsidy, tough luck. You know? You see, we're keeping them dependent. We're keeping them on a string. We have lots of examples in the WTO to really stop Africa industrializing. This is the crucial thing. We cannot allow them to produce manufacturers. It's not difficult. Trust me, it's not difficult. We need nationalist governments. We need them committed to industrialization, and it won't take them a decade to move out from where they are. This is the fundamental point. It's not difficult. But this next round of the WTO is designed to block that. If we had time, I would go through all the different things that they're trying to put into place to block anyone else getting on top of the ladder. You've read this book of Ha-Joon Chang, Kicking Away the Ladder. You see, when we become rich, we make sure the others can't climb up the ladder and join us. Okay? And this is what this next Doha round is about. It's to make sure, especially sub-Saharan African countries, do not escape. You see, we teach, in many cases, garbage. And it doesn't hurt anyone, a lot of this garbage. You know, it's a blah, 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 blah. And we don't know what we have learned, but anyway, we were there at the university and you got a certificate and you go away and you feel you've learned something. But sometimes we teach very destructive things. And no more important than when we're teaching people from developing countries. Okay, and one of those very damaging and destructive things is the doctrine of comparative advantage. It's a lie from beginning to end. It's utter crap. It has been decimated many times, but we keep it in every curriculum. Why? Because it tells sub-Saharan African countries that their destiny is to produce raw materials, you see. And if you produce raw materials, you get rich just like we are in the West. You see, this is the game we're playing. And just for you to be totally confused, we normally build models with it, mathematical models, so you really have no idea what we're talking about. But it seems all very scientific. Then we have the modern version of this is because it's all a failure, we know it's a failure, we now have a new generation of economists saying, it's only a failure because you're all corrupt in your countries. We call that new institutional economics. You've all probably learnt it all, but you didn't know why they invented it. It was invented to tell you the same thing. You should keep producing raw materials. Now, don't be as corrupt as you were before. Nobody ever told you that aid was designed to actually start the corruption process in the first place. Okay, and we need corruption to make sure you're doing all these things. But now we blame the victim. You're poor because it's your fault, basically. And you're poor, stupid, and corrupt, basically. This is the message that we're giving people. We also have many theoretical justifications, but I'm going to say something controversial to end. And that is, there are also what I call more enlightened approaches, but which are also potentially destructive for sub-Saharan African development. And this is where I come back to the IMF and the World Bank. You see, now they're all into poverty alleviation. They want you to concentrate on redistributing income, and it's something nice. You're young people, you're socially conscious, you're aware. You don't like all this injustice. So you gravitate towards what we call pro-poor strategies. But actually, I'm sorry to tell you, that is not what Africa needs. Africa needs aggressive industrialization. When China was a communist country and we had equal distribution, who feared China? Who took them seriously? They weren't even the size of the Netherlands. But today, I can't open an internet site, I can't open a magazine, I can't open a newspaper without China, 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 China. And we know what has built China. It's not socialism or communism, it's capitalism, guys. It's manufacturing, it's production. This is what creates employment, this is what created jobs. I'm not pro-capitalist, but this is the reality, and unfortunately, we're now going to get caught with the good cop, bad cop. The good cop is now IMF saying, you must concentrate on poverty reduction and income redistribution, as long as we can take you away from industrialization. This is the crucial thing, you know. Africa, historically, sub-Saharan Africa, has been fundamental to the global prosperity of the advanced countries, okay? And Africa had a role to play. It has a role as a raw material producer.
We need to understand the real reason why USAID is in Africa. And not just USAID, but other NGOs. You look at DFID, which is the British equivalent, and many other smaller ones. Their sole purpose was to act as if they're coming to rescue Africa. They're coming to fill in the gaps in government services, gaps in education, gaps in healthcare, gaps in humanitarian services. They're coming in the guise of addressing issues to do with human rights, issues to do with environmental protection and social justice. They are coming in claiming that they're introducing grassroots initiatives that are going to help the people. And so they use that as a way to go into the most remote parts of Africa. They're talking about government advocacy. When you look at it on paper, it all looks really good. But they're actually wolf in sheep's clothing. They are using that open access sounding humanitarian to constantly destabilize governments. I can tell you right now, the majority of African leaders, and not just African leaders, but leaders in the developing world, are celebrating the exit of USAID. I was listening to a program, I believe it was CNN, and I was jumping up and down. It was a government official from Hungary. He was echoing the same sentiments. He said they are happy USAID is leaving Hungary because they are always supporting opposition. Their form of government advocacy is supporting whoever can keep the government in a turmoil.
So, Ambassador, let me just jump in here for you. This is a message that I don't think many Americans hear. I think many Americans believe, not all of them, but many of them believe that AID was essentially set up for philanthropic reasons, for dealing with the HIV/AIDS crisis, dealing with the various instabilities in the region, dealing with infrastructure deficits. But you're saying that there was something else as part of that package, meddling.
A major meddling agenda. Major meddling agenda. The majority of some of the workers, now the average USAID worker may not realize it, but quite a few of them are also operatives who are underground, and their major agenda is to destabilize governments, destabilize countries. If you think about it, their sole purpose, for example, filling in the gaps in healthcare and education, where is the change? Show me one country that USAID was in and education improved. Show me what country where USAID was in and healthcare improved. The social services they're bringing, it's peanuts. The American taxpayer needs to know the billions of dollars that are being given to USAID, a fraction is making it to the people.
Look, one of the highest profile medicine programs is PEPFAR, which both Republicans and Democrats here in Washington are really having outcries about. It was one of the signature programs of President George W. Bush to try to respond to the HIV/AIDS epidemic in Africa. What's the view on that front?
Let's look at what HIV/AIDS was used to do. We know of a program that was run out of South Africa where they actually were injecting people with the virus. The reason some of the AIDS virus spread as rapidly as it did in Southern Africa, there were some very dirty games being played on African people. They were using Africans as guinea pigs for experimental activities. Even when you look at every aspect, they're using us as guinea pigs. Yes, there is some good, a percentage of some good, but not all of it is done with good intentions. You look at agriculture, they're destroying African agriculture by introducing those GMOs. You plant your seed in one season, your soil is finished. We used to have seeds that we can use from one season to the other. The introduction of GMOs through these agencies, USAID is one of them. We are destroying Africa in a massive way. A little good is coming out, but by and large, the end result, they mean no good. They can turn around and give us an inventory and say, as long as you have been in Africa and also other parts of the world, show us your success rate. You claim you are helping governments with education and healthcare. Show us your success rate. But I also turn around and say, African governments, why do you need this little aid to assist you in providing proper health care, proper education? The average African government can afford to provide those services for their people.
I happen to have many friends that work for USAID, both in the field but also in Washington. And I have to tell you, I know that they believe that they're doing good, that they're trying to move the needle for those that are in desperate situation and desperate conditions. I think it's very interesting to raise the question of what the other political purposes are. But as you sort of look at the scene now, the French are very big in aid programs. As you mentioned, the British. There are also Chinese aid programs. Are all of these programs essentially power plays, and all of them need to be suspended? How do you see some of the other international programs in Africa now?
Well, these are all underground covert operations. Why does Africa need them? Why do we need them? Africa has been the provider. If you look at Europe, Europe cannot survive without Africa. One situation that people don't realize, post-World War, when the US came up with the Marshall Plan, what they don't tell you is that the contribution through exploitation of African minerals was actually the biggest funder of the European Recovery Plan, ERP, aka the Marshall Plan. US contributed $13 billion, which is now present day 175 billion, which, by the way, the American taxpayer must be paid back. Nobody's asking for that money back. But what they don't tell you is that Africa, through exploitation of its resources by the Europeans, was actually a much, much bigger contribution to the European recovery post-World War II. Nobody talks about that. Why does such a continent that did so much to help Europe recover continue to be so poor? Let's be realistic here. Let's not talk about peanuts. Africa does not need the aid. What we need is for those who are exploiting Africa to stop. Africa has everything it needs. If Africa could have contributed as much as it did to the recovery of Europe post-World War II, why wasn't Africa equally developed?
So what happens next, Adhikana? You and I have talked about this before, and the exploitation of minerals, of uranium, of cobalt, of nickel, et cetera, and many other rare earths, which is apparently very much on President Trump's mind,
right,
because we see the negotiation for rare earths with Ukraine. But you and I have talked about the artificially low prices and the fact that many economies in Africa don't participate in the gains and growth of the exploitation of those resources. What happens now when these aid programs are withdrawing? Does the social contract between American mining operations or other global mining operations, does it give an opportunity for the power dynamic to shift and change? And what will that look like?
I think this is a wake-up call for the African leaders. To the same extent that President Trump is saying USA first, African leaders must also say Africa first. This is a wake-up call to the African leaders to take inventory of what is really happening in their countries. Do they really need the peanuts that are coming in as aid? What is really going out? If I may use the example of what happened in Niger, when the government decided they were going to take over the mining of their uranium. The French companies that were mining the uranium were paying the government 80 cents a kilo for the uranium, and then turning around and selling the uranium to the rest of the world at 200 euros a kilo. So that one move from the Nigerian government to say we are now going to take ownership of our own uranium, they went from realizing about $1 billion in uranium resources to over 300 billion a year. Do you realize what I'm talking about? No huge, amount of NGO could bring that kind of money. And this is only one mineral. Now imagine the country taking inventory of all their minerals and benefiting from their natural resources like the rest of the countries in the Western world. That is what African leaders need to look at.
Do you see that in the horizon of African leaders right now?
They're
do you see them? Who do you see as the standout winners of that kind of change? And who do you think is still chasing AID contracts?
Let me tell you, we need to look at what's happening in Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali. President Traoré is standing up. He is saying the natural resources in Burkina Faso, they belong to the people of Burkina Faso. Niger is doing the same thing. Mali is doing the same thing. Every leader must look at what's happening in the Sahel nations to say, like anybody else, you must take care of your people. You have your natural resources. You have everything you need to take care of your people. Why do you continue to be beggars? Look at what is being brought in by not only USAID, but all the NGOs in your country. It's peanuts. It's a joke that the African leaders should continue to be beggars of peanuts when you are looking and allowing billions to get out of your country year in and year out, if not trillions, in natural resources that your people should be benefiting from. It is a wake-up call for African leaders to wake up and say, President Trump is saying, US first, America first. You too must say, your country first, because you have everything it takes. It is a joke. It is embarrassing to see I have not seen any African leader cry over USAID living. I can tell you for a fact, the average African leader privately is celebrating the exit of USAID because they know what is really going on.
Let me ask you a geopolitical question. And again, you and I have had the opportunity on this show to talk about it before, which is the relationship of the United States broadly with the African continent. Now, I realize the continent has a lot of different nations, different countries that are part of it. But President Trump is not known to care much about Africa. He has talked about it in very derogatory language. His comments about USAID have had nothing to do with Africa. They've had to do with downsizing the scale of government and the perception of corruption and policies that are not consistent with his own. He's not framed any of this in terms of African needs or whatnot. So when you think about that, what do you think is the possibility of changing the dynamics of the relationship between the Trump administration and African leaders when it doesn't seem to be on his radar screen?
To be honest with you, why should African leaders care? Why should Trump care about Africa? He shouldn't care about Africa to the same extent that the African leaders really shouldn't care about a relationship either. If the relationship can be worked out, that's wonderful. But if President Trump is saying, I have a mandate from my own people to take care of my people, and I'm doing what I need to do to take care of my people, African leaders need to take that same position. You see, it takes two to tango. If President Trump does not want a relationship with Africa, Africans shouldn't be begging for it. Are you with me?
Do you think this will transmit to the way Africa deals with Europe? With France, with Germany?
I'm hoping that this will translate into African leaders looking from within, because they don't really need to keep looking outside. They have what it takes. It's a wake-up call, just like what happened during COVID. It was a wake-up call for African leaders to realize that you must begin to look within Africa to take care of yourself. When the chips were down, the world walked away from Africa during COVID. So that's a reality. No supplies were coming to Africa, Africans were not manufacturing anything, and African leaders were forced to look from within. This, I'm hoping, is another wake-up call where African leaders also begin to realize we must look from within. But let me underscore this. The average African leader and majority of leaders of developing world, I can tell you, they are celebrating the exit of USAID, and we hope that there will be exits of many other NGOs that are carrying out nefarious activities in Africa and anywhere else in the developing world in order to further the agendas of their governments, which is to continuously destabilize, divide, and conquer.
To be quite candid, Ambassador, much of the world looks at the African continent as a gold mine, as a diamond mine, as a mine for precious materials and resources, which we've talked about. One of those other major powers, rising powers in the world, is China.
Yes.
China has huge stakes, and there's always been the narrative that America is not doing aid very well in Africa, that China is beating us. Bono would come out and say, hey, in all of the refugee camps and whatnot set up in Africa, even the tents say made in China, even though the United States may be providing the support.
Yes.
That there's a lot of both criticism and acclaim for the fact that China has been involved in recent decades in helping Africa develop its infrastructure and whatnot, to position itself better in Africa than the United States and maybe Europe have with regards to resource agreements in Africa. So is China the next villain in the story?
Well, again, my position is Africans must take a position and protect their turf. China wants to come and exploit Africa, they'll get away with it to the extent that Africans allow them. The United States wants to come and exploit Africa, they'll get away with it to the extent that the Africans will allow them. The question is, does Africa have an African position when they come to the negotiating table with the world? The answer right now is no. Africa must unite. Africa must speak with one voice, and Africa must go to the world stage with one voice, one agenda, one plan that the world will have to respond. But as long as Africa is going to the world as bitty little countries, as Togo, as Eswatini, as Guinea-Bissau, Africa is fighting a losing game. Africa must unite, and Africa must speak with one voice. That is the only way a strong, united Africa can take a rightful place on the world stage and be respected and stop the exploitation.
Why is it so hard?
I think it's a long history. If you go back to colonization, if you go back to the Christianity and how it was introduced, how we were trained to be subservient. In Africa, the rules of the game were the same. I think that what was done to brainwash black people around the world, long before they even left Africa, we are still suffering from that legacy of colonization, the legacy of slavery, where the people in power, they themselves don't believe they can do it. We still have leaders who believe you can't make it unless you're working with white people. We have individuals who think only something brought in by white people is what's likely to succeed. With that kind of mentality, it is a very difficult battle. Our battle to succeed, to unite as the African continent, it is a battle of the mind. And each and every African must realize that we are defeated where it matters the most, which is the mind. Brainwashed to the core. Brainwashed to not believe in ourselves and what we can do as individuals. Wherein lies the problem.
I won't call them nationalists, but our continentalists are those that are trying to, as you say, take stock of their situation and raise up Africa and their nations by their own bootstraps to be less dependent on external countries and investment and aid. Is that flavor beginning to take hold? Is that sort of leadership being, is it more and more evident, or do you think you have a big lift ahead?
I think what's happening in the United States through President Trump is going to make them realize that this is what you need to do. You're going to have to pull yourself up by the bootstraps. President Trump is saying, I have a mandate, America first. So you Africans, are you going to sit back and just wait and see the next move that President Trump is going to make? Or you're going to also say, I have a mandate from my people, and I'm going to do what I need to do. Take inventory of what you have in your country. Use it and use it wisely. No more begging. You don't need to have anybody filling the gaps in your educational system. You don't need anybody filling the gaps in your healthcare system. You don't need anybody creating initiatives in the most remote parts of your country because they claim that you, the government, cannot have access to that. How can somebody come from all the way from the United States, all the way from Britain, and access the most remote part of your country that you in your country cannot access? It is the most stupid thing. When you listen to the justifications and the explanations as to why they are there, it's a joke, and this needs to stop.
Just finally, Ambassador, when you look at U.S. behavior retracting, we've just got a minute left, but I would love to know from you, what do you think about the UN? What do you think about the International Court of Justice? Because probably the contraction that we're talking about is going to happen in a lot of institutions. Do you worry that Africa will be worse off without those institutions?
No, those institutions were created after the Second World War. United Nations, it took 4 weeks to create the United Nations. Why? In order to help the recovery of Europe. The World Bank, the IMF, it took 3 weeks to create them after the Second World War in order to aid in the recovery of Europe from its own self-implosion and destruction. So no. These institutions were not created to benefit the developing world. To the contrary, they were built to steal from the developing world. Their success is based on the failures of the developing nations where they have been stealing from. So no. We must celebrate what President Trump is doing by exiting the United Nations, by exiting the World Health Organization. We need the U.S. to exit the World Trade Organization because they are doing nothing on the African end. They are giving a blind eye to blatant exploitations, unequal, uneven trade policies that are hurting Africa. You take, for example, cocoa. Majority of the cocoa coming out of the world comes from West Africa, and yet it's only recently that African nations were allowed to add value to their cocoa. The World Trade Organizations, we may have a sister in charge.
Well, Ambassador Adikana Chihombori-Quao.
This is the truth about Nigeria's civil war, the Biafran war, that Nigerians have not been told about, the untold truth about the Nigerian civil war, that Nigerians are not told even today in 2025. The elite group of people in the US-led West, this elite group of people that I call the Kolo Cabal, the elite group of people in the global North, they played our leaders against each other. And they sat back and watched while our leaders fought themselves to the death. They have mastered the art and craft, the science of divide and conquer. And they used it against us. And it was effective. They sat back and they watched while our leaders did all the work for them. We were at each other's throat, thinking that what they called the Biafran War, the civil war, was fought for tribal reasons. But it was not. It was these people that have mastered the craft of divide and conquer that were at work. So when we focus on our leaders, and we do have a right to do that, and blame them, yes, we do, but we are just treating the symptoms. The real disease are these elite group of people in the US-led global north that were pulling the strings behind the scene. How did they do it? In 1960, when Nigeria got independence, that was 15 years after the end of the Second World War. That was the height of the Cold War between the US-led West and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, the USSR, or the Soviet Union, which we call Russia today. On the other hand, it was the height of it. That gave birth to 3 reasons that the Americans and the Europeans capitalized on to instigate Nigeria's civil war. 3 reasons. Number 1, the non-aligned movement. You see, America turned out to be the biggest beneficiary of the First and the Second World War. This game they are playing now with Nigeria, they played it against the Europeans. In the First and in the Second World War, they played it and they succeeded fantastically. That gave birth to America as the world's most powerful country, at least on the Western Hemisphere. But they still had the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic to contend with. They didn't like it. So it was the height of the Cold War between the US and the USSR. The US went about forcing countries to align with them against the USSR, the Soviet Union. They were forcing everybody. They succeeded first with Europe because at that time, Europe had been weakened from the effects of the Second World War. Remember, it was only UK. And if the United States had not intervened by dropping the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Hitler would have taken over the United Kingdom. It was just by a hair's breadth that the United Kingdom avoided being conquered. So Europe was hugely weakened. And America took advantage of it. Promise of helping to rebuild, punishment for Hitler and Germany and Japan and all that. They coerced the Europeans to be aligned with the US. And they did that. And after they succeeded, they proceeded to Africa to force Africa to align. But at this time, Africa had a crop of leaders. Yes, Africa had a crop of leaders that were very, very strong on sovereignty, that were very, very strong on Pan-Africanism, right? They took the new rule-based order to effect, yes. In 1944, the Americans, out of their smartness, called for the Bretton Woods Conference. Unknown to the rest of the world, the Bretton Woods Conference in America's secret was to replace the Berlin Conference, because when they carried out the Berlin Conference in 1885, America was not given a very strong seat at the table. So that is why when they shared Africa, America did not get any tangible peace. They shared Africa amongst Europe, the Berlin Conference. So America came up with a smart way through the Bretton Woods Conference of 1944 to come up with the concept of sovereignty. That was when the United Nations was birthed. That was when IMF and the World Bank, they were bettered. The World Trade Organization, they were all bettered. It was a strategic move by the US-led West at the time for the US to dominate the world perpetually. But Europe, because they were weakened by the Second World War, did not have much of a choice. They tried to resist, but at the end, America had its way. So the United Nations was born. The UN Charter was created, and then the concept of sovereignty of countries became important. So, as a powerful country, you cannot openly interfere in the affairs of another country anymore because you had the UN Charter of Sovereignty. But that did not stop the Americans, because you see, they forced the Europeans to take their hands off Africa by pushing for decolonization after the Second World War. And in any case, Britain or the UK was already weakened, France was already weakened, so they didn't have much of a military force to enforce their colonization agenda. And America, wanting to rewrite the history of the Berlin Conference in 1885 in its favor, pushed for decolonization, pushed for an end to colonization. Unknown to Europe, it is for the ultimate interest of the Americans. They pushed for decolonization because they had a new form of colonization in mind. A remote kind of colonization, which is the neo-colonization that we have at play today. But with Europe weakened and their hands off Africa, America can now truly get their share. Okay. So now, they've started having their way, but the only stumbling block on the part of the US was the Soviet Union. And so there was the Cold War. And the 1960s was the height of it. In fact, that's when you had the Cuban Missile Crisis, where America was talking about their Western hemisphere of influence, and that Russia cannot come and put their nuclear weapons in anywhere in their Western area of influence. It was the height of it. But the USSR also was pushing for countries to also align. So, but America was stronger in their push, so they were forcing African countries to align with the US against Russia. And then you had the issue with the Congo DRC because of its vast resources. All of this is about Africa's resources. We're trying to play a foundation as to why the elite group of people in the US-led West succeeded in playing our leaders against themselves. 3 reasons. The first one is the non-aligned movement. Our leaders then, African leaders across the whole of Africa, from Sylvanus Olympio of Togo to Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana to Thomas Sankara of Burkina Faso to Lumumba, and you had a crop of leaders that were against it. So they formed a group and called it the non-aligned movement. Nigeria was amongst them. Tafawa Balewa was a spearheader, was a strong proponent of the non-aligned movement. Along with the non-aligned movement came a far more powerful concept of Pan-Africanism that the elite group of people in the global north would not have. And then add on top of that a third reason, which is nationalism. Because at that time, you had the problem, the oil crisis of Iran, where the Shah was overthrown. The Americans helped to overthrow, the CIA helped to overthrow and then install their own puppet. And then the Iranians were able to come together and resist and pushed out the American puppet. And then they nationalized British Petroleum and Western oil companies. They nationalized it. So there was the third issue of nationalization. So the eyes of African leaders started getting opened. Oh, we can be non-aligned, which the American-led West did not like. We can be Pan-Africanist. We can come together and form a single African Union with a single currency, with a single military, so that we can develop, so that we can industrialize. The Americans and the Europeans, they did not want that, because they don't want an Africa that is powerful, that is industrialized. They do not want it. And then add on top of that the fear of nationalization of Western assets, particularly oil companies. So in a smart move, the US led West, this elite group of people, they found a plan to eliminate these leaders. First, they started with coups. They started training our soldiers, inviting them to go to Sandhurst, then in the UK, Sandhurst Royal Academy. They were training our soldiers, and they were putting the thoughts of coup in their minds through a highly advanced psychological operation that is most accurately described as a psychological juju. It works on you, and you will think you are the one doing what you're doing. You will not know that you are doing what they have programmed you to do. That's what they were now doing, putting thoughts of coup in our soldiers and instigating ethnic division, political divisions in them so that they will do the job. Our Nigerian soldiers will do the job for this global elite. They will just sit down and allow divide and rule, divide and conquer to play out. Our leaders will do the job for them. We'll fight each other to the death. We'll take out one another. And so our first set, our best crop of leaders, our team A, were eliminated through the psychological operation. There are evidence of this. All the coups that have happened in West Africa were traceable to the African Command of the United Nations, of the United States. We saw the video where the US general was being questioned about why the US was seen training the coupists for Burkina Faso, for Niger, for Mali. Why they were seen. There's a video of it on the internet. Why they were trained. And then after the training, those coupists went and took the coup. See, many people don't know that there's this Cold War between the US and France, between the US and the UK. We don't know. America wanted the uranium and the resources that the French were enjoying in these French former colonies that were still colonies anyway. They wanted the uranium, they wanted the gold. And so they thought that by supporting the coup against France, they would get an advantage, but they made a mistake. They miscalculated. Instead of the coupists aligning with America, the coupists aligned with Russia. And after kicking France out, they came and kicked the Americans out. Something they still regret till today. But you see, these people have contingencies that have contingencies. They have plan A and a plan B and a plan C and a plan D. But the only way to cure it is first of all understand, how did they do it? How is it that in 2025, Nigerians still do not know that this elite group of people in the US-led West are the people that we should blame for the Nigerian civil war? You can blame our Nigerian leaders. You can blame the generals or the majors. You can blame the counter-coupists. You can blame all of them. Yes, do. But that would just be treating the symptoms. If you want to cure the disease, you have to go to the root of the matter. The elite group of people in the US-led West. How did they do it? They know how to manipulate. It's called psychological operation, PSYOPs. They have mastered and perfected it. This PSYOPs is stronger than our juju.
We need to understand the real reason why USAID is.
There is an elite core in this country that has dominated American society. A trilateral commission, Council on Foreign Relations. Well, let's face it, they've dominated the State Department for 40 years, and pretty much openly.
All right,
so.
but what are they trying to do?
Well, their objective is to try to bring about a gradual transition in our society, a dissolving of sovereignty, and a moving steadily to the left on the political spectrum.
Well, who are they?
The elitist groups that I mentioned, particularly key individuals and policymakers in the Council
Is
on
the
Foreign
International
Relations.
Monetary Fund part of it?
Well, I would say the International Monetary Fund has certainly been set up for the purpose of facilitating that transfer of sovereignty and transfer of wealth. You are looking at a group that has worked to bring about a dissolution of national sovereignties on the road to world government. And certainly you're familiar with the local professor Carroll Quigley, who has been part of your club, in which he admitted all this. And he said in his book, Tragedy and Hope, the only thing I disagree is that we've worked to keep it a secret. And you see Arthur Schlesinger Jr. writing way back in 1947, says, yes, this is the hidden policy of America. But we can't tell the American public because they're too unsophisticated to see the value. Well, let me suggest that you read the May-June issue of the Partisan Review of 1947, Tom, and you can read it for yourself. It's called...
There was a conspiracy. A conspiracy
Oh, he
to
didn't
promote
use
communism?
Oh, no, he didn't use the word conspiracy. He said the objective was to bring about... Let me finish. I'll tell you. He said that the objective, the secret policy, which we can't tell the American public because they're not sophisticated enough to see the value, is that through a steady result of erosion of New Deals, we bring the American society steadily to the left. All right, and through a sound concept of benign containment, we merge into the vital center of the socialist left. Those are his words, not mine. There is an elite core in this country that has dominated American society. They have dominated the State Department for 40 years, and pretty much openly. Well, their objective is to try to bring about a dissolving of sovereignty and a moving steadily to the left on the political spectrum.
Well, who are they?
The elitist groups that I mentioned, particularly key individuals and policymakers in the Council
Is the
on Foreign
International
Relations.
Monetary Fund part of it?
Well, I would say the International Monetary Fund has certainly been set up for the purpose of facilitating that transfer of sovereignty and transfer of wealth. You are looking at a group that has worked to bring about a dissolution of national sovereignties on the road to world government, phasing out increasingly national sovereignty into regional government and phasing out sovereignties into international treaties.
The investor-state dispute settlement system. This is a shadow legal system whereby multinational corporations can sue states for enacting policies they don't like, which infringe on their quote-unquote investor rights. And it happens all over the world. This system is enshrined in free trade agreements, which are a bit of a misnomer because free trade agreement makes you think it's all about mutual lowering of tariffs. But actually, embedded in these trade agreements are huge amounts of legal mechanisms whereby corporations can enforce their will on the countries that are part of that agreement. One of these is the ISDS system. So NAFTA has ISDS provisions in it, plenty of other free trade agreements.
So when the EU makes a trade agreement with a country in sub-Saharan Africa, it has ISDS in it.
Exactly. And there's the other part of this is what are called bilateral investment treaties or BITs. And they're all over the world. They're between two countries. And they just sort of, they're a regime, an investment regime that both countries have to abide by. But ISDS is enshrined in nearly all of those. So, and is enforced. So in the case of a corporation that wants to use a BIT, for example, you can just create a shell company in a country that has a BIT with the country you want to sue and just sue them that way. That happens all the time. So there's this whole web of treaties, agreements, which enshrine this ISDS system. And what it means, effectively, away from all the acronyms, all the boring stuff, is that corporations can sue some of the poorest countries in the world for huge amounts of money, billions of dollars often, for enacting policies like not allowing the company an environmental permit to dig for gold, for example. That was one case we looked at in El Salvador. There was one case in Egypt where a French water company sued the Egyptian government for raising the minimum wage. So anything that a corporation doesn't like that a government does, they can potentially sue for. Now, you would think that that is a massive attack on democracy, and it is. Because the second part of it is, it's not just the cases that get to court. Now, most of these cases are heard at a place called the International Center for the Settlement of Investment Disputes, ICSID, which is a part of the World Bank. The International Center for the Settlement of Investment Disputes,
right.
ICSID. It's an arm of the World Bank. It was created in 1966 at the height of what I'm talking about, at the height of decolonization and newly independent governments. And what it is the main venue where these cases are heard. It's also a kangaroo court. There's so much to get out on this stuff, but it's also a kangaroo court because these decisions are made by 3 arbitrators, one appointed by the company, one appointed by the government, and one agreed on by both. And it's hugely secretive. A lot of the documents you can't get your hands on. It's not just the cases that are heard at ICSID and this wealth transferred to the corporations that is the major issue. Regulatory chill and policy making chill is the major issue, because if you have this huge infrastructure in place, this huge web of economic arrangements whereby multinationals can sue you, it means that it impacts on your thinking when you're devising policies in your country. You would think when a government is deliberating whether to grant an environmental permit, their main priority would be, what impact does this have on our people? But actually the internal deliberations within the Guatemalan government were about, are we going to get sued by that company if we enact that policy? They eventually gave them the environmental permit. And that happens all over the world, this chill, this policy making chill. And it's by design. Corporations want to have an insurance mechanism where they can get their profits and get the policies they want in place above the heads of national governments. There are enforcement mechanisms that it's not like you can just say, okay, we're not going to listen to you. If arbitration, if you're called to an arbitration, you don't recognize it, they can start taking your assets internationally. They can. There's a lot of ways of enforcing this system on developing countries. So it's not like somewhere. It's not like domestically where you could just used to be able to nationalize something and then you should pay compensation, but that would be negotiated. This is like this international court will decide and you have to pay, otherwise we'll start stripping you.
So what I mean, you alluded to it there, but what would happen if they didn't pay? So let's say Bolivia takes a mining company owned by the US away from them. The court says, no, you need to, and they're taking it into public ownership, and the court said, this is quite a reasonable one, right? Rather than the case of the Italians in South Africa, which is completely unacceptable, I think. They say, no, you have to give it back to them. And they say, no. They fine them a couple of $100 million. They say, well, we don't recognize this court or this fine. What happens then?
There's actual legal systems in place where they can take your assets internationally. So if you have any kind of government assets in foreign countries, they can be taken. If you have boats in international waters, they can be taken. It becomes a legal matter. But also, you can be massively punished by the Bretton Woods institutions themselves, because ICSID is part of the World Bank, but also so the IMF. They can do really punitive things that mean that you basically can't function. Your credit lines will be pulled. You won't be able to get liquidity if you need it in a time of crisis.
The crisis which is in Africa today is because of philosophical, ideological, strategic, economic mistakes, which we have been talking about since the 1960s. But I was very happy to hear the president of the World Bank talking about prosperity instead of profiteering. These were his own words. That's what I picked. This has been the problem. Aid has been for profiteering. The main reason why there is no growth is because the growth factors are not funded. They are not even understood. What are the growth factors? We now talk of private sector-led growth. Yes, but for the private sector to grow, what does it need? It needs low costs of production. And what are the low costs of production? Number one, transport. You must have low transport costs. Where do low transport costs come from? From the railway. If you don't fund the railway, how will you get low transport costs? Wonderful people, Banco Mundial, IMF, all of these. Where will low cost of production come from? if you don't have a railway. I have been here for the last 64 years. I've been watching as a student leader, as a freedom fighter, now as the leader of a country. How many railways have been constructed or funded in Africa? The few that have been was by China, the Tanzania Railway to Zambia, and recently China, another one here in Kenya, and then Tanzania on their own, they are building a railway line. So, if you are talking of helping Africa, the railway, I don't want to be involved in any other words, no, please. The railway. Because if you fund the railway, you will have low cost of transport, and you can produce products which are cheap, which can be bought in the world. So you audit how much funding, all these billions you are talking about, how much of it has gone to the railway. Audit it. The second cost pusher is electricity. If you don't find electricity, and you talk about sustainable development, what are you talking about? Private sector-led growth. We must have low-cost electricity, not exceeding 5 cents per kilowatt hour. That's what I insist on in Uganda. I'm tired of all these stories. These neo-colonial civil servants who have been holding us back, I have put my foot down, say I don't want to hear those stories. And Uganda is developing, and it will develop, because I don't entertain that nonsense anymore. Borrowing for what? Capacity building. Imagine. Seminars. They call you in a hotel, you eat chapati, you eat mandazi. They say that is capacity building. Capacity building should be on the ground, not just seminars. So, the second point, Excellencies, electricity. The third one, those people who talk about private sector-led growth, private sector-led growth. I have been trying to borrow money for our UDB, Uganda Development Bank, a bank which funds manufacturers. No, I don't get support for that. Instead, they want me to go, my people to go to commercial banks. But commercial banks cannot give, no, those commercial banks are to encourage imports. Because the only person who can borrow money and pay it back from a commercial bank is a trader who goes to China, goes to where, Dubai, brings products, sells them quickly, and pays back. So, if you are serious, I need to hear about the low-cost funding for manufacturing. Not for stories, not for what, no, manufacturing. How about funding for irrigation? Because if you want to stabilize agriculture, a country like Uganda is very rich, we have got everything. But still sometimes we get some erraticness in the rain. So in order to stabilize, I've been trying to look for a loan for irrigation. I can't easily get it. Very difficult to get. A loan for seminars, very quick. The civil servants, what? But a loan for irrigation, you don't see. Now finally, the loan for I don't know the situation in other African countries, and I don't have time to talk for a long. I don't have opportunity to talk for long. But Uganda is a very rich country. But one of the problems we were having was that our people were outside the money economy. They were in what they call subsistence sector. They just produce for eating, produce for eating, produce for eating. So I was looking for money. Please give me money to give coffee seedlings to these fellows who are just producing for the stomach, so that they can produce for the stomach, but also produce for the pocket, so that they join the money economy. You cannot imagine that by 2013, a few years ago, 68% of the homesteads in Uganda were still in the subsistence sector, in the non-money economy. You audit your countries. What is the situation? What is the percentage of the people? So I had now to use my own money, because I couldn't borrow money from anybody. The loans are for capacity building, for, I don't know, sometimes they give for ICT, but ICT is a communication system, mainly. What are you going to communicate on that communication? How are you? Good morning. And you think that is communication. Why don't you have ICT linked with agriculture, linked with industry? Oh, now the digital. Are you eating computers? Have I seen anybody eating computers? Just running up and down. Maneno tu. So I was insisting that all these Ugandans must be in the money economy. 2013, not long ago, 68% of Ugandans were outside the money economy, because Uganda is a very rich country. A fool can survive there. In other countries, fools die. But in Uganda, fools can thrive there. They just eat. He stays with his brothers. He eats. He goes from there to the sister. He eats. He's not earning anything, but he's eating. So we said, no, everybody must be involved in the money economy. We couldn't get any support for that. But we funded it ourselves. Each year, we spend about $300 million of our own to make these villagers join the money economy by producing for the stomach, but also for the pocket. And from 2013, I was now told that for the first time, 61% of the people are in the money economy of the homesteads. It is only 39% that are still out. You imagine those are still there, just eating, no money. So therefore, this meeting is, then you get your neo-colonial civil servants. They talk of import support. Imagine there is money for import support. Import support. Mm-hmm. The governor writes to me, reports, we have got import cover for so many months. But I don't want to import. I want to export. Why don't you tell me about import substitution and export promotion? Instead you are telling me of import support. So money is available for to become more dependent. Now, finally, part of the wars we fought in Uganda were to get rid of the neo-colonial groups which were there, which were stopping us from thinking. We had to get rid of them. by force. But one of the problems was Africa producing raw materials. Matière primaire. They call it in French. Matière primaire. Raw materials. Imagine coffee. The global value of coffee is $460 billion. All the coffee producing countries of the world, Brazil, us, all this, we only get 25 billion of that. Out of the 460 billion, the coffee producing countries get 25 billion. And Africa gets only 2.5 billion. 900 million of that comes to Uganda because Uganda produces a lot of coffee. A country like Germany, which has no coffee, earns $65 billion from coffee. So, I sell a kilo of coffee, good grade coffee, $2.5. Somebody in London will get $241 from that 1 kilo. Okay, there are other costs on the way. I don't want to, because he's the owner of a restaurant and so on. But coffee roasting, coffee grinding, coffee packing must happen here in Africa. It must happen at source. The shirt I'm putting on is Ugandan cotton. I don't put on foreign clothes. It's only the trousers I'm putting on because I can't go naked. Because they have not solved that problem for me. So, if you look at cotton, how many job levels are there? Job levels. You grow the cotton. Okay, that one we do. Those jobs we do. We gene the cotton. Kutoa mbegu, remove the seeds. That one we do here. And we end there. When you hear all these countries which have got crisis, Burkina Faso, I don't know what, Mali, all of them are cotton growing countries. But how much textiles are they producing? They're importing textiles, I don't know from where. So, now if you end at level 2, gening, removing the seeds, then you take the pamba, you take the cotton, to cleverer people who are clever. So, they take the cotton, they spinning, more money, more jobs for their children. They weave, more money, more jobs for their children. They put the print, more money, more jobs for their children. I looked at the figures. Uganda consumes 276 million meters of textiles each year. And that wonderful country of yours spends $880 million on clothes. Some of them dead people's clothes from Europe. When people die, their clothes, they are sent to you people, to Africa. And we spend 800, all the money we earn from coffee goes back to bring dead people's clothes. But we have got one factory there called Nitil. It produces 25 million liters, million meters. So in order to clothe our people in Uganda, without importing, we need about 11 factories, like the one of Native. And they would employ about 20,000 people. So and we would save $880 million, which we are just giving to other people. So, this Ida, what did you say about the modern slavery of the Africans, of producing raw materials? In one of our documents in Addis Ababa, we had talked of Africa producing what it does not consume and consuming what it does not produce. They had put that as a summary in one of the documents of the African Union. We must get rid of the production of raw. I banned the export of minerals from Uganda and process. I banned them. Piga marufuku. Then the agents were going in the corridors, what Mufanyi, no mineral will come from Uganda if it's not processed. You wait until I go away, you can steal the minerals, but not now. I banned this export of unprocessed minerals in 2012. My young brother, His Excellency Ruto, I forgave him and gave him some little iron ore for, I think, 2 or 3 years. Because I've got a lot of iron ore, one of the best in the world. I told him, you come and build the steel factory in Uganda. So I said, okay, because of my young friend, I give you some iron ore for 2 or 3 years. But come and put the factory here. Now you can imagine akili ya watu wenu, my civil servants. An Indian wanted to take that iron ore to India. Imagine. Iron ore in our language is called obtare, but it is soil. Black soil, if you see it, it is soil. To take that to India and do what? Pay your wonderful people $47 per ton. Our iron ore is the purest in the world. It is 70% pure. So you need like 1.5 tons to make a ton of steel. Now, a ton of steel costs $700. Somebody gives you $47 on your wealth, the wealth of your people, and he gets $700 from it. And all the jobs, your children have no jobs. Watoto wa Wahindi wanapata kazi. I can't be part of that treachery. So I banned. There will be no export of unprocessed minerals from Uganda. So there's no business. What do you mean there's no business? So when I banned them, they are flocking in now. They have opened 7 gold refineries. 7 gold refineries. They are there. Because I banned. The other day I was opening a tin refinery. You can imagine this tin, and Sulu Samia may know where we were, the power station. Both sides, the Uganda side and the Tanzanian side. That is all tin. But all this time, imagine, since the British were here, they were taking, walikuwa wanachukua mawe tu, stones, because tin in nature is stone, looks like a stone. So they take that. And they give my people $11 per kilo. And they take it to cleverer people. For the cleverer people, they get $32. My people got 11, those people get $32. And all the jobs. So when I was opening the factory, I was asking the refinery, I was asking them, this boy who opened the factory is a Canadian. I was asking them, has this Canadian brought his own electricity? No. Anatumia umeme wa kwetu. Ameleta maji yake ya factory? No. Anatumia maji yetu. Internet anatumia ya nani? Ya kwetu. So, out of the $32, much of that money will remain in Uganda. Pay for the raw material, pay for the electricity, pay for the water, all that remains in Uganda. So, what does, first of all, my African brothers and sisters say about this hemorrhage of Africa? Hemorrhage. Echikurukuto, we call it in Uganda. This hemorrhage must stop. The crisis you see in these countries is because of stagnation of the last 60 years since independence. The population is increasing, the economies are not increasing. What do you expect? So with these few words, Your Excellencies, what do I say? Merci beaucoup.
In this hand, I have millions of dollars for you and your friends if you play our game. In this hand, I have a gun in case you decide not to. Now, my words were more diplomatic than that, but that was the message. I was an economic hitman. I was given a job as an economist at an international consulting firm in Boston with close ties to the NSA and the CIA. I would go to countries with resources our corporations covet, like oil. I'd arrange a huge loan to those countries from the World Bank or its sister organizations, but the money wouldn't actually go to the country. It would go to our corporations, Bechtel, Halliburton, Brown and Root, familiar names, to build big infrastructure projects in those countries and incidentally make huge profits in the process. They'd build power plants and industrial parks, things that would benefit a few wealthy families in the country, the ones that own the industries. But the majority of the people would suffer. They would be left holding a huge debt they couldn't repay. So we'd go back and say, since you can't pay your debt, sell your resource, oil or whatever, real cheap to our corporations. Privatize. Sell your utilities, your schools, your jails, everything like that to our corporations.
This is the truth about Nigeria's civil war, the Biafran War, that Nigerians have not been told about. The untold truth about the Nigerian civil war that Nigerians are not told even today in 2025. The elite group of people in the US-led West, this elite group of people that I call the Kolo Cabal, the elite group of people in the global North, they played our leaders against each other. And they sat back and watched while our leaders fought themselves to the death. They have mastered the art and craft, the science of divide and conquer, and they used it against us. And it was effective. They sat back and they watched while our leaders did all the work for them. We were at each other's throat, thinking that what they called the Biafran War, the civil war, was fought for tribal reasons. But it was not. It was these people that have mastered the craft of divide and conquer that were at work. So when we focus on our leaders, and we do have a right to do that, and blame them, yes, we do, but we are just treating the symptoms. The real disease are these elite group of people in the US-led global North that were pulling the strings behind the scene. How did they do it? In 1960, when Nigeria got independence, that was 15 years after the end of the Second World War. That was the height of the Cold War between the US-led West and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, the USSR, or the Soviet Union, which we call Russia today. On the other hand, it was the height of it. That gave birth to 3 reasons that the Americans and the Europeans capitalized on to instigate Nigeria's civil war. 3 reasons. Number 1, the non-aligned movement. You see, America turned out to be the biggest beneficiary of the First and the Second World War. This game they are playing now with Nigeria, they played it against the Europeans. In the First and in the Second World War, they played it and they succeeded fantastically. That gave birth to America as the world's most powerful country, at least on the Western Hemisphere. But they still had the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic to contend with. They didn't like it. So it was the height of the Cold War between the US and the USSR. The US went about forcing countries to align with them against the USSR, the Soviet Union. They were forcing everybody. They succeeded first with Europe because at that time, Europe had been weakened from the effects of the Second World War. Remember, it was only UK. And if the United States had not intervened by dropping the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Hitler would have taken over the United Kingdom. It was just by a hair's breadth that the United Kingdom avoided being conquered. So Europe was hugely weakened. And America took advantage of it. Promise of helping to rebuild, punishment for Hitler and Germany and Japan and all that. They coerced the Europeans to be aligned with the US. And they did that. And after they succeeded, they proceeded to Africa to force Africa to align. But at this time, Africa had a crop of leaders. Yes, Africa had a crop of leaders that were very, very strong on sovereignty, that were very, very strong on Pan-Africanism, right? They took the new rule-based order to effect, yes. In 1944, the Americans, out of their smartness, called for the Bretton Woods Conference. Unknown to the rest of the world, the Bretton Woods Conference, in America's secret, was to replace the Berlin Conference, because when they carried out the Berlin Conference in 1885, America was not given a very strong seat at the table. So that is why when they shared Africa, America did not get any tangible peace. They shared Africa amongst Europe, the Berlin Conference. So America came up with a smart way through the Bretton Woods Conference of 1944 to come up with the concept of sovereignty. That was when the United Nations was birthed. That was when IMF and the World Bank, they were bettered. The World Trade Organization, they were all bettered. It was a strategic move by the US-led West at the time for the US to dominate the world perpetually. But Europe, because they were weakened by the Second World War, did not have much of a choice. They tried to resist, but at the end, America had its way. So the United Nations was born. The UN Charter was created, and then the concept of sovereignty of countries became important. So as a powerful country, you cannot openly interfere in the affairs of another country anymore because you had the UN Charter of Sovereignty. But that did not stop the Americans, because you see, they forced the Europeans to take their hands off Africa by pushing for decolonization after the Second World War. And in any case, Britain or the UK was already weakened, France was already weakened, so they didn't have much of a military force to enforce their colonization agenda. And America, wanting to rewrite the history of the Berlin Conference in 1885 in its favor, pushed for decolonization, pushed for an end to colonization. Unknown to Europe, it is for the ultimate interest of the American. They pushed for decolonization because they had a new form of colonization in mind. A remote kind of colonization, which is the neo-colonization that we have at play today. But with Europe weakened and their hands off Africa, America can now truly get their share. Okay. So now, they've started having their way, but the only stumbling block on the part of the US was the Soviet Union. And so there was the Cold War. And the 1960s was the height of it. In fact, that's when you had the Cuban Missile Crisis, where America was talking about their Western hemisphere of influence, and that Russia cannot come and put their nuclear weapons in anywhere in their Western area of influence. It was the height of it. But the USSR also was pushing for countries to also align. So, but America was stronger in their push, so they were forcing African countries to align with the US against Russia. And then you had the issue with the Congo DRC because of its vast resources. All of this is about Africa's resources. We're trying to play a foundation as to why the elite group of people in the US-led West succeeded in playing our leaders against themselves. 3 reasons. The first one is the non-aligned movement. Our leaders then, African leaders across the whole of Africa, from Sylvanus Olympio of Togo to Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana to Thomas Sankara of Burkina Faso to Lumumba, and you had a crop of leaders that were against it. So they formed a group and called it the non-aligned movement. Nigeria was amongst them. Tafawa Balewa was a spearheader, was a strong proponent of the non-aligned movement. Along with the non-aligned movement came a far more powerful concept of Pan-Africanism that the elite group of people in the global north would not have. And then add on top of that a third reason, which is nationalism. Because at that time, you had the problem, the oil crisis of Iran, where the Shah was overthrown, the Americans helped to overthrow, the CIA helped to overthrow, and then install their own puppet, and then the Iranians were able to come together and resist and pushed out the American puppet, and then they nationalized British Petroleum and Western oil companies. They nationalized it. So there was the third issue of nationalization. So the eyes of African leaders started getting opened. Oh, we can be non-aligned, which the American-led West did not like. We can be Pan-Africanist. We can come together and form a single African Union with a single currency, with a single military, so that we can develop, so that we can industrialize. The Americans and the Europeans, they did not want that, because they don't want an Africa that is powerful, that is industrialized. They do not want it. And then add on top of that the fear of nationalization of Western assets, particularly oil companies. So in a smart move, the US-led West, this elite group of people, they found a plan to eliminate these leaders. First, they started with coups. They started training our soldiers, inviting them to go to Sandhurst, then in the UK, Sandhurst Royal Academy. They were training our soldiers, and they were putting the thoughts of coup in their minds through a highly advanced psychological operation that is most accurately described as a psychological juju. It works on you, and you will think you are the one doing what you're doing. You will not know that you are doing what they have programmed you to do. That's what they were now doing, putting thoughts of coup in our soldiers and instigating ethnic division, political divisions in them so that they will do the job. Our Nigerian soldiers will do the job for this global elite. They will just sit down and allow divide and rule, divide and conquer to play out. Our leaders will do the job for them. We'll fight each other to the death. We'll take out one another. And so our first set, our best crop of leaders, our team A, were eliminated through the psychological operation. There are evidence of this. All the coups that have happened in West Africa were traceable to the African Command of the United Nations, of the United States. We saw the video where the U.S. general was being questioned about why the U.S. was seen training the coupists for Burkina Faso, for Niger, for Mali, why they were seen. There's a video of it on the internet. Why they were trained. And then after the training, those coupists went and took the coup. See, many people don't know that there is this Cold War between the US and France, between the US and the UK. We don't know. America wanted the uranium and the resources that the French were enjoying in these French former colonies that were still colonies anyway. They wanted the uranium, they wanted the gold. And so they thought that by supporting the coup against France, they would get an advantage, but they made a mistake. They miscalculated. Instead of the coupists aligning with America, the coupists aligned with Russia. And after kicking France out, they came and kicked the Americans out. Something they still regret till today. But you see, these people have contingencies that have contingencies. They have plan A and a plan B and a plan C and a plan D. But the only way to cure it is first of all understand, how did they do it? How is it that in 2025, Nigerians still do not know that this elite group of people in the US-led West are the people that we should blame for the Nigerian civil war? You can blame our Nigerian leaders. You can blame the generals or the majors. You can blame the counter-coupists. You can blame all of them. Yes, do. But that would just be treating the symptoms. If you want to cure the disease, you have to go to the root of the matter. The elite group of people in the US-led West. How did they do it? They know how to manipulate. It's called psychological operation, PSYOPs. They have mastered and perfected it. This PSYOPs is stronger than our juju. They have mastered it. So they played you see, when the first coup happened in January of 1966, January 15, very quickly, it was the same Western media that were present that created the narrative that, oh, it's an Igbo coup. And you know, even while the coupists were planning the coup, the Emmanuel Ifajunas, the Gbulie, the Nzogu, Kaduna Nzogu, in fact, Gbulie is on record for having questioned Nzogu, Kaduna Nzogu, at the time and say, who are the people that are involved in this coup? And Nzogu replied and mentioned their names. And he said, these people are mostly Igbo people. Oh. Will they not say later that it was an Igbo coup? This was Ben Gbulie, questioning Nzogu and Ifajuna and Donna Tuzukafu and the rest. But Nzogu fell for the psychological operation of the elite group of people in the US-led West. He fell for it and said, don't worry, it doesn't matter. The elite group of people, the Kolo Cabal, they are to blame. And if we don't know this, the mistakes of 1966 will be repeated again. They are being repeated now. They don't want us to benefit from our resources. They don't want us they don't want us to be self-reliant. They want us to be dependent on them. And they are using certain tools to manipulate our leaders. They did it then. They are still doing it now. If we do not realize it, we will continue to fight each other. IBB came out and said, oh, the January 15, 1966 coup is not an Igbo coup. Meanwhile, he was one of the people that were cajoled. One of the people that their PSYOPs juju worked on, that carried out the mutiny in the Ibadan battalion against Igbo leaders. The battalion leader then, Okonweze, was assassinated by the mutiny led by the same Babangida. At that time, the narrative that was pushed on them through the psychological operation of this elite group of people in the US-led West was that it was an Igbo coup. And so the July coup was an anti-Igbo coup. They went about taking the lives of Igbo top military officers. And we fall for it. We're still talking tribalism. We're still talking religion. These are tools they use to divide us. If we do not realize that the real enemy, the disease itself, is this elite group of people in the US-led West, then our problems will continue. If we do not realize that the way they do it is force leaders on us who have comma somewhere and use those comma to blackmail and coerce the leaders to implement rubbish policies. Policies that do not benefit us, policies that give access to the resources of Nigeria to this elite group of people in the global north, US-led global north. Those policies, they implemented policies that will keep us dependent on this elite group of people in the US-led West. This is their aim. Once we understand it, then we can deal with it. Like I said before, their contingencies have contingencies. The only way to defeat darkness is to shine light. Because the tool, the single most important ingredient that they use to manufacture the different tools that they are using to force bad leaders on us is corruption. They created corruption. They created avenues for that made corruption, international corruption, possible. Through foreign direct investment, through foreign trade, multinational corporations, through aid, through debt. You people think Tinubu is just borrowing money, borrowing money, borrowing money. He's been forced to borrow it. And the terms of those loans are such that give away Nigeria's sovereignty. You think a Nigerian is ruling Nigeria? It's the IMF and the World Bank that is doing it indirectly, and it's clear to us. They don't hide it. They're the ones that will tell Tinubu that, oh, subsidy is gone, and Tinubu will come out and say, subsidy is gone. Then they will come back and say, oh, no, subsidy is back. And Tinubu will come out and say, oh, sorry, subsidy is back. Then they will come again and say, remove it, increase the price again. Then they will come and say, oh, subsidy is gone again. Everything the IMF and the World Bank want, they got from Tinubu. This is how they do it. They manipulate our leaders to do their bidding, to enact rubbish policies. So if we must get out of this trap, we must understand how they do this. And then come up with strategies to counter it. If you have read the Confessions of John Perkins in the book, The Confession of an Economic Hitman, you'll understand that it is only by shining light on the activities of this elite group of people in the US-led West, their activities in our country, that is the only way we break free. And the starting point to flush out leaders that have been infected by the influence of this Kolo cabal is to form a political party that is based on ideologies. A political party that levels the playing field, that gives equal opportunities to patriotic Nigerians to serve their country in the interest of their countries first. That political party is what we need. Right now, do we have it in Nigeria? You answer the question. Do we have a political party that creates a level playing field? In America, for you to become a nominee, to become an aspirant, all you need to do is pay $5,000. $5,000 is less than 50% of the annual minimum wage in America, which means that if you are a worker in America, you are not disenfranchised. In fact, to make it even better, if you do not even want to pay the $5,000 or you do not have the $5,000, you can just go to the election body, get 3,000 forms, get 3,000 Americans to sign it. Once you have 3,000 signatures, you don't even need to pay the $5,000 anymore. That way, they create a level playing field for everybody to come. Now, in Nigeria, do we have such? No. The political parties you have will come out and argue and say that, oh, if you make it cheap, number one, you cannot run the election because you need money to run the party primaries. Then number two, it will be an all-comers affair. 100 million people will apply to want to be president. It is not true. If you want to run a primaries and you want it to be free and fair, you don't need so much money to run it. You can run a political party primaries electronically for free without spending a dime. But they will use this as an excuse and tell you they need money to run the primaries. And then they will tell you also that, oh, if you make it cheap, then everybody will come. There will be too many people that will want to contest and it will be unmanageable. It is also not true. Because mechanisms will be put in place. Do you have all Americans coming to say they want to run for president? The answer is no. So we need a political party. If the existing ones will not take on this reform to level the playing field, then we must create one. This is the starting point to flushing out the corrupt leaders that have been infected by the influence of this Kolo cabal. Political parties should be direct primaries. That is how it is in America. That is how it is everywhere. But when they now come with the concept of indirect primaries, where you now need delegates, what happens? You are creating the platform, the foundation for aspirants to buy delegates. That is where corruptions begin to start. So if we want to fix it, we need a political party that levels that playing field. Do we have it in the existing political parties? I stand to be corrected, no. If we don't have it, then we can form it. A political parties that believe that, oh, we must institutionalize social welfare. If Nigerians are broke, they don't have to start looking for powerful people, divine connection, destiny helper. No, they don't have to start looking for that. That's not how they do it in America. If you earn less than $19,000 per annum in the US, you are entitled to social welfare support. It is not so much, so you can't say you will not work and depend on it. But so far as you are an American and you earn less than $19,000 every year, what happens is that automatically you don't need to know the president, you don't need to know the governor, you don't need to know anybody. By law, you just apply to Social Security, they check your Social Security number to verify your account details, and they send money directly into your account. You don't need any intermediary. We need a political party that will push this agenda. Do we have it now? The answer is no. And so many other ideologies. You must give right of first refusal to local Nigerian companies first. You must give right of first refusal to local Nigerian manufacturers first, if you are serious as a government to developing your economy. Are we seeing that now? No. This is part of the policies that this elite group of people want, and they force our leaders to implement. And our leaders know that these policies are against our own interests as Nigerians, but they implement it anyway because it gives them the opportunity to get peanuts as benefit. Those peanuts may be big, maybe cars abroad, the latest houses, big houses and all that. So far as they get those, they don't mind selling their brother and sister Nigerians into modern slavery. That is what your leaders are doing. They spent $160 million to buy SUVs, Land Cruisers, Prado, Escalade, and all that. Which developed country do you see that their president drives a car that is made by a foreign country? You never find it. The other time that Xi Jinping visited America, they carried their own Chinese-made presidential vehicle all across the ocean, Pacific Ocean, Atlantic Ocean, to America. And Xi Jinping was bragging about the car to Joe Biden. And Joe Biden turned around and said, you see my own? That is the car. They call it the Beast. Oh, it's a wonderful car. They were bragging about their own presidential cars that were made by their own corporations. The same thing it is with the French. The same thing it is with the British. The same thing it is with the Russians. But when it comes to Nigeria, we pride ourselves in even the small assembly plants that we have, we don't patronize them. We abandon them and then we go international. We need a political party that believes in the ideology of giving right of first refusal to Nigerian companies and investing in the 4 critical parts that a Tinubu administration will not dare to invest in. Will not dare to invest in. We'll talk about those 4. They will not dare to invest in it. Homegrown agricultural solution, they're not born Tinubu where make invest in them. Steel and fabrication technology, they're not born them where make invest in them. Local software solutions, they're not born them where making try them. Local semiconductor technology, they're not born them where. The elite group of people in the US-led West, their hands are on him like this. Do our bidding or else. What happened to Buhari with the NSAS will happen to you. And so Tinubu is excited in doing their bidding. What gives a Tinubu the boldness to say, no matter how you protest, I will do it? Because he knows that so long as he's pushing the agenda that the IMF and the World Bank and the US-led West like, there's nothing you people can do. No amount of protest can work. He knows. But the solution is to create a political party that levels the political playing field so that a new crop of leaders will phase out these corrupt leaders that have been infected by the influence of the elite group of people in the global north. We need you to join us to create this party. It's not going to be easy, but it is doable. It will be hard, but it is possible. Let us work together. You see the way they are realigning. Let us realign too. There's a link in the description for you to support us. I want to use the opportunity to thank those of you that are supporting already. Please, God bless you. This is a remarkable investment you're making into your country. Because if we succeed with this, Nigeria will change forever for the better. We thank you for your support. We are calling on others to seize the opportunity to support us, to activate this plan. Please. So that Nigeria can change. If we don't activate this plan, forget it. 2027 will just be a repeat of 2023. We're not working so that we can win in 2027. If we work fast enough, we can start winning even before 2027. But if we don't work fast enough, it doesn't matter. If we don't get it in 2027, we can get it 2031. But we must start working right now. Send your donations and contributions to the account in the description. And click the link in the description to join us to create this Abundance Party of Nigeria. Let us take this country back. This is the only way. It is not by protest. It is not by gra-gra. We don't have the resources to face them on that front. But we can shine light on the activities. Because when light shines, darkness disappears. We're waiting for you.